Grüezi miteinander, Gregory von Lieberstock here. I'd like to preface this great conversation that I've had with Meigh with the following forward, and I want to make it brief. If you're listening to this podcast, it may be that you are hearing things that go against popular belief, that go against claims, and that go against things that I said, that somebody else said, that major figures in the kettlebell world have said, or scientists or researchers or whatever. The goal is not to discredit people. The goal is to come closer to the truth. And I believe that the clashing of ideas is what moves this whole conversation about kettlebells forward. The quest of truth means asking questions and not just taking everything at face value. Even if you hear me say things, don't take it at face value. Make your own judgment, your own discernment, and do your own research. Sometimes I misinterpret things. Sometimes I misunderstand things. And I think Neil did a great job in explaining his statements and his findings of the trial. But this was my first time talking to a researcher, and maybe sometimes I misunderstood what he said, or maybe I was not asking the proper questions or whatever. This happens throughout the podcast. It's a learning experience, but I really want to make it clear. If we say something, or if I say something, or if my guest is saying something that goes against what somebody else said, this doesn't mean that we're on bad terms with these people. It's not the case. It means that we have two differing opinions, then we can put it on one table, talk about it, and this is what, in the end, moves this whole conversation forward. Enjoy the conversation with Meigh. Ladies and gentlemen, another episode of the Kettle Nights podcast. I have with me Meigh from, where are you actually from?
Australia, Gold Coast.
Australia. So you have to imagine, guys, we're now communicating from Switzerland in the heart of Europe to Australia, to the other side of, what's your time right now?
6 p.m. and it's
6
dark
p.m.
and cold.
Yeah, so it's 10 a.m. in the morning right here. So that's beautiful. The podcast takes us around the world. I love this. This is such a fascinating experience. So we have Meigh from Australia. He has a PhD in sports and exercise medicine. He's a physiotherapist and an RKC certified instructor. Welcome to the podcast, Neil.
Thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. So we had a conversation via Instagram, and I saw you because I was into some kettlebell science, and I stumbled over your scientific paper, which is the Bell trial. So why don't you just give us a rundown of the Bell trial, of everything that surrounds it? Do
you want the background to that as well?
Everything.
How it came about. I had a physiotherapy practice here on the Gold Coast 2015 to 2017, and kettlebells featured in that. At that point, I had branded myself as the kettlebell physio, and I was using kettlebells to promote exercising and group training. The lady that inspired the Bell trial was a lady called Rosette, who was 67 when she came in. She had 2 prosthetic knees, and she was worried that her knees were going to crumble. She'd had them both replaced at the same time, and the surgeon had said these prostheses will last about 10 years, and that 10-year time frame is about to tick over. She was relatively fit and healthy. She used to paddle in dragon boats. Long story short, she came in and I started training with her one-on-one, and then she started joining the group classes. And by the time I closed that business in August 2017, she'd completed nearly 200 classes with me. Wow. I'm 5'8", she's 5 foot at best, and she could swing a 40-kilo bell. So it's a 68-year-old lady that can swing 40 kilos powerful. With 2 prosthetic knees. Yeah. Wow. But there were 2 occasions where she'd come into a group class and she had described a stumble and a trip at home and not tripping, and specifically attributed that to the change in physical function that she had had through the group classes. And that got me thinking, maybe the kettlebell training for somebody like Rosette, as an older adult that has a higher risk of falls, might be beneficial. I ended up closing the practice, and at that point, the next logical step for me was to go back to uni and do a PhD. And so I approached the uni and said, I've got this idea for an exercise trial involving older adults and whether kettlebell training might reduce their risk of falls. It didn't pan out that way. I wasn't able to do a study to answer that particular question, but that was probably beneficial because it gave me the opportunity to just train older adults that weren't physically active. So we call them insufficiently active, and see what happened. Yeah. So I had a group of 32 people that signed up. There were 29 that started because a couple dropped out before we started training. And I trained them as hard as I could for 12 weeks. And we compared that against a 12-week control period. With COVID, that changed things slightly. But in essence, that was the trial. And we were looking at all of the measures of health-related physical fitness. The primary outcome was grip strength, but I wanted to measure as many things as I could, anticipating that after that study, we would have lots of hypotheses as to whether it might improve falls risk or osteoarthritic knee symptoms or low back pain or anything else.
So you were able to, just to reiterate it, so you were able to start this trial based upon this experience with this older woman who she tripped at home, but she was able to catch herself somehow.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, and so your hypothesis was, okay, maybe the kettlebell training led to the fact that she was able to catch herself, not hurt herself. So that led to this idea, hey, I want to do this trial. So you started doing the trial. You had this 32 people and a couple dropped out, and you were able to train with these people for 12 weeks straight, right?
The plan was to train them for 12 weeks.
But I saw COVID
interrupted
COVID made it hard. Yep.
So I was training with them 5 days a week. Well, they were training 5 days a week. So I split the group into two, and they were training with me for 45 minutes, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then I would give them exercises to do on Tuesday, Thursday. So it's 5 days a week for 12 weeks.
Wow.
Because of COVID, they ended up doing another 4 weeks. So it ended up as 16 weeks all up. But they were training as hard as I could comfortably push them. So, and that was deliberate because older adults tends to be massively underdosed, particularly in research. There's this sense that because they're older, they're at greater risk. So we don't want to risk hurting them. So we'll go the other way and we don't give them something that's useful in terms of weight. So we give them something that's too light. So so your idea, because I wanted to ask this, so you already answered it. The idea was, hey, let's give them more than the average, because most people would, gravitate between 2 and 3 workouts per week. But you were like, no, let's extend this, because older people tend to be not really challenged to a certain extent in research, right? Is that? Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So I had at that point my heaviest was a 68 kilo bell. So I bought that one specifically for the trials. And these were people from 60 to 80 years of age that weren't currently physically active. Some of them were walking, but none of them were doing any form of resistance training and hadn't done for 6 months or more. Some of them had never set foot in a gym before and never done any resistance training.
And some of them were overweight, or everybody was kind of average?
There was so there was very little selection of participants. So I had an advert in a local newspaper and had over 150 people put their hand up.
Wow.
Which was amazing. And I got the recruitment done in 3 weeks. But they were very representative. So I had
150 people.
Yeah, just to take a step back, my inclusion criteria was, if this person were to have walked into my physiotherapy practice and say, I'd like to join a group class, would I have taken them? That was my benchmark. If there were any significant risks, then they wouldn't be appropriate for me to be training them and pushing them as hard as I had planned. There was one gentleman, the highest performer was a gentleman that had an Australian AFL football background. So he was previously athletic. But there were 2 people that struggled getting off the ground, literally getting off the ground without any weight. That was actually an exclusion criteria, but they hadn't disclosed it and they got in anyway. So it was a real spectrum of physical capacity. Wow.
So they were like, I want to join. I better not tell this guy that I can't stand up. I just want to join. I like, what really resonates with me is that you have this advert, and so many people put their hands up. That's like, wow, there's actually a need, or at least the initial perspective would be, wow, people, older individuals, there is a need for them to, and they want to do it. They want to try.
That really surprised me. I started on Facebook, and I thought, I've got a lot of people following my Facebook page. This is where I'm going to advertise and try and get recruits for the study. And nothing happened. And I thought, oh, this is going to backfire spectacularly, because I'm on a timeline doing the PhD, and approached the newsroom at my university, and they organised an advert to go on the front of the local newspaper, and then all of a sudden, boom, it was done in 3 weeks. So
that's something that really reminds me is that, you know, that I'm learning from the marketing background running a business, is if you have a great offer with the wrong audience, it never clicks. You have to have a great offer with the right audience, and then it clicks. Because probably the people that are following you on your Facebook page are probably, you know, I'm just guessing, people in our age who are interested in kettlebell training or just physiotherapy, right? Okay. Yeah.
And there would be very, very few older adults that would have been suitable for the trial following my page. They just, it's just a completely different demographic, and my page tends to be more science-based anyway.
Wow. So then from there, you've gathered these participants, and what happened from there?
Well, I had lots of questions going into the PhD. I had lots of questions about kettlebells and the way that kettlebells worked. So the first year was spent looking at the research. I was promoting quote unquote evidence-based practice as a physio, but I didn't feel like I had any evidence to support my practice, which was promoting kettlebell training. So I spent most of 2018 reading everything I could and writing that scoping review, which I think you've read, which was published at the beginning of 2019. And I got myself on the force platform, and the first of the papers was that force profile of what a proficient hardstyle swing looked like, because there wasn't really anything that had been published that gave me an indication of what normal was supposed to be. So I had data on myself, and I published that. And then all of the people that had signed up for the trial, I asked them to come into the lab, and I had them do deadlifts and swings with certain weights to see what their force profile would look like, and then published that as a separate paper. So then we had a comparison of, this is what a proficient hardstyle swing is supposed to look like, and this is what an older novice swing looks like. And then that gave me an opportunity to say or suggest that if we can change the way that they're swinging, assuming that technique is important, and technique is important to the outcomes that I was interested in the study, then what's the size of this scope, assuming that there is a difference between the way that they're swinging and the way that I was swinging. We'll train them, and then after the study, we'll get them back into the lab and see if their force profile has changed. I assumed that it would, because they were doing thousands and thousands of swings. I think the average was about 3,000.
And can you describe force profile? What does that actually mean? Have
you come across Jason Lake? Jason Lake's kettlebell research papers?
L-E-Y-K, right? Yeah.
L-A-K-E, Jason Lake from UK. He published a paper called Mechanical Demands of the Kettlebell Swing, I think. In a nutshell, that's the paper.
So that's L-E-I-K or Y-K?
L-A-K-E, like
Lake, like lake. Lake.
Yeah.
Okay, Lake.
Yep. Yeah. So Jason Lake.
Yeah, gotta check. Yeah.
So he's a more of a biomechanist. I'm not a biomechanist at all. So he was looking at in detail what's happening when you perform a swing on a force plate. So I guess to put it into some context, when you're learning a hard style swing, you're taught to swing the bell or project the bell forward. It's all about forward force. And that belief that most or the majority of the force is forward, not upward, dictates how you coach somebody. So it's how you move the hips and all of the
bracing up the abdominals.
Yeah, forward force.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things I wanted to look at. How much forward force is there?
And how much is there?
That's not much. The complete opposite of what I thought. So for me, for example, compared to the vertical force, so if you compare vertical force with horizontal forward force, with a 68 kilo bell, 20%.
With a 68 kilo bell, the forward force is 20%.
Yeah, of the vertical force. And that was, I think it got to 21%, and that was as high as it got. With an 8 kilo bell, 16 kilo bell, somewhere around 10%. It was so much smaller than I thought.
The rest is vertical force.
Yes.
So you know what that and just for me to understand this, we always hear bracing the abdominals, and I know this because I know because great that I'm having this conversation with you, and I had the conversation with Dr. Stuart McGill. So Dr. Stuart McGill says, listen, when we're swinging, we are generating shear forces in the spine, right? So if we are generating shear forces, the prerequisite, and you have to correct me if I'm wrong. You know, I think there's some biomechanical understanding. I'm not as proficient at this, but I think I got it right, but you have to correct me. If we experience, the prerequisite for shear forces has to be forward force.
Well, this was the interesting thing about Stu's paper, is that when you perform a deadlift, there's an anterior or forward shear force. So it's almost like the vertebra that's on top is trying to move itself forward.
Yes.
So when you flex forward, it would be moving forward. It makes logical sense. But his paper showed that there was a backwards shear force with a swing.
Wow. And so if we don't have a lot of forward force, is there even any shear force involved?
Well, there must be. The question is,
to the extent where to the extent where it matters, because that's actually where the question is, because people are, especially hardstyle, you know, I have both. I see both worlds. I see the sport world. I see the hardstyle world. Yep. And the funny thing is, when you talk to a Valery Fedorenko, who's a master of sport world class, so that means he was really a dominating beast in snatch, long cycle, and everything, and jerking. Back in the days when the rules were different, he says, you know, I'm using a 48 kg to swing to relax my lower back.
One of the comments in Stu's paper, and I can't remember it off the top of my head because it's been so long since I looked at it, but he compared that shear force to occupational health and safety standards, and he said it was so low that it wasn't a concern. And I think that was with a 16 kilo bell. But obviously, as the bell weight goes up, the shear force is going to go up. My guess would be that the shear force with a swing is not particularly relevant, unless somebody has some form of back issue or back pathology. So if they've got some form of bony break, and anecdotally, I've heard of one person where they had a back injury and somebody had attributed it to swings, but you just don't know. We don't. Stu's paper was a modeling of data, and that hasn't been replicated yet. And I think that was 2012. So you have to take that or give it the weight that it deserves. We need better data to have a better conclusion that shear forces are relevant and impact certain exercises and certain populations, and we just don't have that yet. I wouldn't be giving any recommendations or changing training techniques and style based on a belief about shear forces.
And you know, that kind of like changes the landscape to a certain extent. If we have more data that says, listen, the shear forces that everybody talks about in the swing, even with a 60, what was it, 68?
16. Oh, for me, I don't have any data on shear forces, but the forward force with a 68 for me swinging, it was 21%. Okay. But generally, I'm somewhere around 15 with a 24 kilo, 32 kilo bell.
So this this might change the way you actually have to coach a swing. So maybe
it should, yes.
Because we are used to, especially in hardstyle, because the other style, they're completely different. I think there's something in between. The sport is completely different. I believe there's some kind of a hybrid version that's also different. And the hardstyle, where we always talk about heavy weights, bracing, tension, it might change if we actually know, well, there aren't even that many shear forces involved, so maybe we don't even have to. And that's what you shared in your Instagram message with me. I love this. You said, what was it? A coach told you, the coach is supposed to teach the exercise so that the person's not doing it wrong, and that's it, or something in the message you shared with me. Because we coaches always tend to want to make the exercise perfect, right? We want people to have the perfect swing.
Yeah. Well, where that Instagram post came from, which was a bit tongue-in-cheek, was the follow-up to the Bell trial. So I had, because of COVID, I was only able to get the under-70s in, but I had the under-70s come back in and replicate the same exercises that they'd done beforehand. So beforehand, they'd never swung a kettlebell. So it was completely brand new to them. The women swung 8, 10, 12, and if they looked good enough, so if their technique was okay and they looked comfortable, I would let them swing 14. Mm-hmm. And the men went up to 16. And then they replicated all of that. Big picture, their swing technique in terms of the force and the way that their swing looked, it's called a force time curve. You can mm-hmm. see the technique in the force time curve. Mm-hmm. Didn't really change much. So we've got 24 people that have trained for 16 weeks, 5 days a week, averaged 3,000 swings. They've got all of these benefits, but their technique has not changed much. Now, that might be a reflection of the nature of the training being group. So it was almost impossible for me to train with an individual and see somebody and go, you know what, I really want to help you, but I can't because I've got 15 other people in the group.
Yeah, most definitely.
And the fact that COVID pushed them all to home for the second half, and I didn't see them after week 6. But they got the benefits of training, and their technique didn't change, and their technique wasn't all that good. So that makes me think that for that particular population, they can just swing a bell, and their technique doesn't really matter that much, and they're still going to get some benefit out of it. Then the big picture for me was that these people aren't exercising at all. They're not using any form of resistance training. And I can get them to pick up a kettlebell and have the confidence to swing a kettlebell and do other exercises with it. And they've got the confidence to do it at home on their own without somebody having to be there next to them to watch their technique and support them and encourage them. They can get the benefit, and the technique didn't matter that much.
Wow. Which actually goes against what that's what you say in the paper. Yeah. Popular belief, because you're like, if you would come up to me and say, okay, I have this group of older, a group of older from the older population, 30 people, where you say 60 to 80 years of age.
I'm gonna give it the other way.
Yeah, and
it's more important that they do it properly.
And and you're like, I'm gonna give them 3,000 swings in the next 12 weeks, and you know what? I'm gonna let them do it at home. I'm not able to teach them proper technique. Everybody be like, are you crazy? They have to, blah, 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 blah. But your experience is like, of course, they got the initial technique, but I love what you say. That's something that you only understand when you coach people. And I just had a conversation with a client yesterday, and I told him, listen, if you are in a group setting of 12 people, you are losing eyesight. I think, starting from 6 people, because we have a small group that's 6 people, that's where you still have some oversight. But if it goes beyond, you're losing oversight. And you have to take this into account. And people know this. And you have to manage expectations. It's not a personal training session. So technique is always a little bit different when you have somebody that's in a group setting versus somebody who's getting one-on-one coaching. Yes, we all know this.
Yeah.
So these people went home. They continued the trial. So their perfect wasn't their technique wasn't perfect. It was probably even, let's say, like from our standards, not good, but they were still reaping the benefits. No injuries, no problems?
No serious injuries.
No serious injuries? Yeah.
I was pushing them hard. So we use an RPE, rate of perceived exertion. The only time that in the trial that I actually programmed their training load volume was the last week, because it was really hard to train people remotely for 6 weeks, 5 days a week, and track all of that data. But I wanted them to finish the last day of the trial with a personal best. So I programmed their Monday, Wednesday, Friday sessions so that they all finished on a PB on that last day. And every single one of them recorded either a 9 or a 10 out of 10 rating of perceived exertion. They were pushing themselves really hard. But
and you didn't and you were, from my point of view, you were completely like convinced that yes, we have to push them really hard. It is the part of the older population. Let's go. No, no holds barred.
I didn't think I had to push them hard, but I wanted to push them hard to not prove a point, but to show what they were capable of. Because I had older people coming into my practice, and if other people had heard what they were doing, they would have thought, you know what, I don't believe you, or that's not possible. So I knew what a lot of older people were capable of doing with a kettlebell. And I wanted to take a group of people and replicate what I had been doing, or the approach that I'd had in the practice. And like you said, with the smaller groups, I didn't have people coming in and doing what I'd done in the trial. Nobody came into the practice and jumped into a group class. If it was a young person and they said, you know what, I've used kettlebells before, I'm pretty good, I do CrossFit, or I've had some training, I would have them show me what they could do, and that gave me an indication. Or they went into a semi-private class, which was a maximum of 4 people, and I trained them on the basics. There was no group class. It was your training how to perform these techniques, and once you can do these comfortably and from my perspective, what I felt was sufficiently competently to then move into a class, then you can go into a class. And then it's less about coaching and teaching, it's about training most training together. So I didn't have the benefit of that with the trial. I didn't know what most of those people were physically capable of. So it was far from ideal. And I wouldn't recommend people push them as hard as I did, because I don't think they needed to. But that was the point, was that you don't need to push them that hard. Yes, lots of people had DOMs. That was almost unavoidable. And there were some minor injuries, but there was nothing major that stopped people. There was one lady that I didn't know when she signed up, but she had a 50-year history of back pain, and she hadn't told me. And at the end of week 2, we had a heavy deadlift ladder, and it flared her back up. And she stuck at it until the end of week 6, and then dropped out at that halfway point. But she was the only person that dropped out because of I wouldn't call it an injury. She'd flared up something that had been there for a long time. Had I known about that, I would have managed her differently and probably encouraged her not to do that heavy deadlift session. But she didn't disclose, and she deliberately didn't disclose the information because there were lots of things that weren't disclosed. There was a person with a significant cancer that I didn't know about until the interviews after. There was a person that had a large aortic aneurysm. If he'd have told me about that, he wouldn't have been in the trial. He was somebody that was reporting session RPEs of 5 or 6 out of 10, where I was expecting a 7 or 8. And I was watching him and he looked comfortable. And I thought, why are you not pushing yourself as hard as I want you to? And he was having scans every 6 months, and had his aorta been 2 to 3 mils larger, he would have had open heart surgery. Or they'd have cracked open his chest and operated on him. And I didn't know that. So, there was a gentleman with osteoporosis I didn't know about, and he had diabetes and he had a peripheral neuropathy in his feet. So he stumbled on the stair climb test. So that's how do we hit 78 stairs, and it's 13.5 meters vertical displacement, and I'm getting them to go up these concrete stairs as fast as possible without holding onto railings, and he tripped at the top. I thought it was just his footwear, but it turns out he had sensory issues with his feet. So there were lots of conditions and
just
chronic
plain reality,
people were
right?
With. Yeah. They were very representative of that age group.
Wow.
But to go back, before I forget, to go back to that forward force issue.
Yeah,
and
I wanted
coaching,
to ask you.
Something that I often see, and I'm not suggesting that technique's not important. I think technique is important and it's valuable, and I would coach somebody a very particular way, because I feel that when they're performing an exercise with a particular weight, that technique is going to be important, or there's going to be a safety issue, or it's going to be more comfortable for them. And I'm sure you'd be the same with kettlebell sport techniques. Technique matters.
Most definitely.
Quite often with hard style, I see people, I describe it as snapping their knees. So they lock their knees out, almost like their knees are being jarred back, and it just looks uncomfortable. And the way that I describe that is, would you do that if you were trying to do a vertical jump? So you know how if you're preparing to do a vertical jump, you squat down and you jump up. Your knees don't do that. They don't do that snapping back. If you try and do a vertical jump and replicate that snapping movement of the knees into full extension, you don't go up. So if the majority of the force in a swing is vertical and not forward, your swing should look like a vertical jump in terms of the way that you move.
No snapping of knees,
No, it's not helpful, because all of the force that's forward is not coming from you pushing against things. I was thinking about this morning. It's Newton's third law of equal and opposite reactions. The only thing that we have to push against is the floor, and the opposite of pushing down to the floor is up. All of the other force in moving the bell forward is an internal force, or internal torque.
And what does that mean? What does that mean? What does it mean, an internal torque?
So you have an external or an internal force. So gravity is an external force. If I'm doing a vertical jump, then I'm pushing down into the ground. So the opposite of pushing down to go up is a vertical force. So all of the force, the reaction force, is vertical. Obviously, the bell, my trunk is bending forwards and up. And I'm holding onto a weight which is moving forwards and backwards. So there is an internal force that my muscles and my joints are having to generate to control the kettlebell moving backwards and forwards. So there has to be a forwards and backwards force, but I'm not pushing or pulling against anything that's either behind me or in front of me. Does that make sense?
So just to reiterate it, if we think about the snapping of the knees, and we think about that we have to battle the kettlebell along the horizontal line, we're actually wasting force, because it's not happening here, it's happening here.
So if you wanted to jump higher, imagine facing a wall, you want to jump higher, but you're going to push into the wall to jump higher. Doesn't make any sense, does it? Because you're pushing into a wall. It's the wrong direction.
Wow.
All of the force, or the majority of the force for the kettlebell swing or a hard style swing, and it's not going to be that much different with the sports swing, is vertical. Because the horizontal ground is the thing that we're pushing against. So all of the force that's going into your body, which you're then using to move the bell, your body is having to generate that internal force to project the bell forward and control your torso moving backwards and forwards. But everything is coming from the ground and a vertical force.
Wow.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense, because I have, just from practical experience, because I see both worlds and I train in both worlds, is when you are using whether this is a sports swing or a hybrid swing, well, it doesn't matter if you use more force from your hips or not, or whether you use the double bent knee, doesn't matter. What matters is when your arms is loose. Hardstyle teaches that you have to, boom, really, right? The protraction of the scapula, right, or retraction. Is it retraction? Protraction?
Retraction. Yep.
Retraction of the scapula. Then, keep the lats tight. Arms are fully extended. So if you don't do this and you keep your arms loose, the kettlebell always travels upwards. Always. When people tell me, because we have a mirror in the gym, and they're like, "Ooh, if I let the bell loose," I'm like, "Don't worry, it won't fall forward. It falls up." Because I'm not into this. I'm into relaxing the arms.
Yeah.
Right? Because I want to work my hips. And even with a 48 kg, if I do hardstyle swing with 48, yes, I have some more tension in my back, but I mean the back is attached to my upper arm. So if my forearm is loose, it doesn't matter. So what happens, I see that the bell travels upwards. And that's the beautiful thing about when you learn the swing and then the clean and the snatch. The bell wants to go upwards anyways.
Yeah. I guess another good example is, that cat's cradle that you quite often see on a desk, which is you've got these little cables with a metal ball at the end of them, and you lift one up and it swings down and hits the next ball, and that thing. Yeah. So you start that sequence by grabbing a ball and you lift it up. So it has vertical displacement. It has potential energy upwards, and it drops. The only reason it moves horizontally is because it's attached to a cable.
It's attached, yeah.
The only reason the bell is moving is the way that it does.
Because it's attached to you.
Yeah. Because it's attached to your arms.
Yeah.
But the force that is used to create that is pushing into the ground. It's a vertical force. Your body is moving a certain way to get the pendulum action. I'm not a biomechanist, and it's unbelievably complicated and way beyond, it's out of my lane. Yeah. But it would be amazing to have a biomechanist pull that apart.
Yeah, most definitely.
The big thing for me was that I thought, because of my background and how I was taught, that the majority of the force was forward. So it was a massive eye-opener for me to see that that wasn't the case, that it was only a tiny proportion. If you have a look in those, the papers that I published, those force profile papers, it shows you a couple of graphs where there's a percentage. For the older adults, it was near a 5%.
Wow. And in your case, because you were the one who did the force profile RKC cert, yeah, it was 16.
Yeah, so for me, between 10 and 15%. It only really went up to 20 with the super heavy bells.
And okay, and just for people to understand, or for me to understand it at least, is even if a person who is proficient, taught in the way of RKC, strong first, whatever, training hardstyle, even in your case, with heavy weights, the forward force, which we have been taught, or everybody thinks that it must be massive, is only 20% when it comes to the max.
Probably less. So if I were to pick up let's say a 24 kilo bell, do a two-handed hardstyle swing, and intentionally try and project the bell forward, as we're taught, the reality is that the force through the floor is probably only about 15% of that.
Wow. So
it's more effective to perform that swing exactly the same way. It's not that you change the way that you swing necessarily, but if you're snapping your knees back, you're probably robbing yourself of a bit of oomph. It would be better to have your hips and your knees and your ankles and your body replicate a vertical jump pattern. It's exactly the same. If you were to record it, it's exactly the same. Wow. So if you're pushing into the ground, making every effort to push into the ground, and that's one of the training tips, is imagine you're doing a vertical jump, but your feet don't leave the ground. That's how you swing the bell. And you just don't need to snap your knees into full extension.
And I get that. One question I have, and because that's from my observation, is I do understand that if people start, the hard style swing has characteristic from my perspective is, especially with the heavier weights, that people start bending their knees to a certain extent. It's almost like a deadlift kind of swing when the weight gets heavier, because the gravitational force, or just the force, I mean, I've learned this recently from a physicist. He taught me that the force of gravity is always the same, but what changes is if you use heavier weight, how do you call it? Because the force of gravity just stays the same, right? It's always the same.
Yeah.
But if you use a heavier bell, it pulls you down earlier because it's heavier. So what kind of force changes?
It's just the weight of the bell.
It's just the weight of the bell. So the weight of the bell.
Can I screen share?
Yeah.
With you now?
Yeah.
So across the bottom here, these are the bell weights from 8 kilos all the way up to 68 kilos.
Yeah.
I'll take this orange line. So that doesn't have my body weights in there.
Yeah.
So big pardon. That's without the kettlebell. This second arrow here is with a 40 kilo bell. This first blue arrow here is with an 8 kilo bell. Mm-hmm. The force barely changed.
Wow.
Or didn't really change much. I went into this thinking, if I double the weight of the bell, I'm going to double the force through the floor. Because I had all these questions about force. And this came back to thinking about older adults. If somebody's got an arthritic knee, those knees generally don't like impact and they don't like bending. With a hard style swing, there's no impact on the floor because they're not jumping and they're not bending their knees much either. Well, it would be the same with any swing. So if I can put force through their knees without it irritating them, surely that's got to be good for an arthritic knee. So I had all of these ideas about how a kettlebell swing might work. And there's this perception that if I swing a heavier bell, it's better. The heavier bell's always a better bell. The goal, if I can do X number of swings with a 24, is to do the same with the 28. If I'm snatching, then it's better to do it with a 32 than a 24. It's
just 1%.
Yeah. Well, no. So this is in hundreds of newtons.
Okay.
But the difference between 14 newtons and 15 newtons is really nothing. But so the effort is
goes
huge.
Up. But how is this? Why is this?
Well, I don't know. I can't answer that. I can't answer it.
That's great. I love this.
Wow. I had so many questions about this and it blew my mind. I thought, how can I be swinging a 40 kilo bell and it feels so much harder?
Yeah.
But the force through the floor is not changing all that much. So then it got me thinking about volume. Like if I've got a little old lady, there's no way in the world that I'm going to be getting her swinging a 40 kilo bell, but surely a 12 or a 16 or a 20 is better than an 8. But if the force through the floor is not changing as much as I think it is, maybe I don't need to push them harder with a heavier bell.
Because I can see it in that graph. You're saying, do I read this correctly? An 800 kg volume compared to a 3200 kg volume, there isn't a huge difference.
Oh, no. So I'm just highlighting that if I do 100 swings with an 8 kilo bell, it's 800 kilos. There's a massive volume difference.
Yeah.
But I can achieve a huge volume with a light weight.
Okay. Now I get it. Yep.
As well. I don't need somebody to be lifting a heavier weight.
Yeah.
Because there may be, there is a different risk profile with a heavier weight, and particularly with older adults. I don't want to say that it's riskier because we don't have much data around risk and kettlebell weights, but logically, if you're asking somebody to lift a heavier weight, particularly if they've never done it
injury
before,
risk goes up.
There may be a different risk profile. But if the goal is to just physically get somebody more active, and it's not about just going heavier all the time for the sake of going heavier, they might be able to get the benefits out of just using the weights and staying light.
Yeah. And staying consistent.
And that's kind of what the trial showed, because my intent was that I was going to progressively load them up, increase their volume and increase their intensity, so bell weight. And I had up to 80 kilos. But because of COVID, they didn't have access to those heavier weights after week 6. I gave them all of mine. I think I had 60 odd bells, and I distributed them between the groups. But they had a maximum of 3 bells at home. There was the 8 that they got to start with for the Tuesday, Thursday training sessions, and then they got 2 others. And they may have got 2 other light bells. So they didn't have access to any bell over 40 kilos for the second half of the trial, and most of them probably had a lightish bell or a medium weight bell. So they trained 5 days a week. They got the benefits. Their swing technique didn't change all that much. So is there a real need to just go heavier for the sake of going heavier? Because clearly, if force is one of the more important components of a swing, which it might not be. One of Jason Lake's paper talks about impulse, which is time under tension, and that's Girafoy's sport to a T, is time under tension.
Yeah, most definitely.
So time under tension or impulse might be the most important. We don't really know. But if force is important, clearly going heavier probably isn't going to be that helpful. That force is somehow being distributed throughout the rest of your body in a way that isn't going through the floor.
How is that? It's so hard to understand, because I love what you have with this. The gray graph, or the gray line, represents rate of perceived exertion, right?
No. So just to go back, all I did here, it's basically the same thing. So that gray line is the body weight and the bell weight. The only reason that line is going up is because I'm including the weight of the bell. The force is going up because I'm using a heavier bell. If I take the kettlebell out of the equation, then that line doesn't really change much between 8 and 40 kilos. It only starts to go up here, and that's not that much.
And it's not
150 to 170 200 newtons is not a lot of.
So Neil, in layman's terms, because I guess to look at the numbers. So if we look at this one here at 40 kilos, which is 150, up to roughly 170, and that's a 150 kilo difference. So just because we have people who are listening also on a podcast, they won't see the graph. So you have, for example, let's start with the 8 kg, right? So the 8 kg is 140 Newton meters, so something above
newtons.
100 newtons, right?
140 newtons.
140 newtons. So as soon as we go up to a 32 kg, it goes up to 150 newton.
Yeah.
So that's a difference of 10.
Yeah.
And how?
10 kilo difference through the floor. And it's pretty much the same at 40 kilos.
So it's a 10 kilo difference from the force when you jump from an 8 to a 32.
40. It's the same at 32 even. It's the same at 28 and 40 there.
Wow. and yeah. Well,
that blew my mind.
That's the data, and we don't know why.
It was not crazy. At all what I expected.
No.
Because if you swing a 40 kilo bell for reps, that's hard work.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that force would look like effort.
Yeah.
Most definitely. It would ramp up the same way that effort did, but it clearly doesn't. And there was only a 20 kilo difference between the 40 and the 68.
You know what this shows, that we know so little about it all. Sometimes, it's what you're proving with, or what you're actually, the data that you're serving. Yeah, I love it. It goes against what we think should happen or is supposed to happen.
Yeah. Just to show you that force time curve. So this was the picture from that paper of me performing the swing, and this is what the force plate profile looked like.
If you could describe it in just a couple of terms so that people who are listening understand it as well.
So I'll go on to the next page here. You have, it almost looks like if you've ever looked at an ECG, it almost looks like an ECG trace. There's two very distinct peaks. And to go back to here, so the drop, so you've got the float and the drop in a hard style swing. So you stand upright, the bell floats up, and then you wait for it to drop. That's when you get the second peak. So this first image here, that's like an 8 kilo bell, the second one is a 16 kilo bell. It only started to change at 28 kilos, but it was a very consistent force profile. And this, let me just, is what some of the older adults' force profiles look like.
Different.
So I've got these two, the two merging of the peaks was where they didn't have the float and the drop. And in this second image here, where you've got multiple peaks, that's where somebody's using their shoulders to lift the bell. And you see that, see that all the time. If a hard style swing is characterized by somebody standing up and the float and the drop phases, you don't get that with the sports swing, and the profile looks very different. But that was a clear illustration of what the force time curve looks like when somebody's lifting the bell. So yeah, my intention was that after all this training, I thought
would change.
That, I thought that all the benefit was going to come from them learning a really good hard style technique, and I had to teach them a certain way, because that was where they were going to get the benefit from. And that's why I had them come back in and we look at what their force time curve looked like. And I thought, oh shit,
it's still
they haven't got any better. They've done 3,000 of these and they haven't got any better. So it was disheartening in one sense, that it almost made me feel like a bit of a failure from a coaching perspective, but there were so many reasons why I wasn't able to coach them the way that I could. But it made me think, hell, we can have them pick up a bell and give them some basic coaching and just get them swinging a light bell. They don't need to go heavy. They can get the load up. The force doesn't really matter all that much. And the technique, well, they're probably not going to get much better anyway.
Okay, let's just reiterate this again in layman's terms, just for me to understand this clearly. So if you demonstrate the swing, so you hook yourself up to the system that shows your force profile, right? You have it happens in the hinge. The hinge is crisp. Boom! The kettlebell starts flying. You use your posterior chain. This is where the graph shoots up, right? And then in the floating phase, because you're relaxed and you're not tensing your arms, or you're not using your arms to move the weight, this is where it goes down. And once it gets back into the backswing, the whole thing starts again. So that's that proper force profile. And this actually shows you from a data perspective how good technique is supposed to look like. So then you have the older people come in. They start initially with that force profile because you hook them up as well. So their force profile looks different. And you're like, okay, well, because I'm teaching them, they're starting, okay. So they come back.
Expect it to look different. If they can't do a hard style swing.
Most definitely, they've never done it. So how are they supposed to know it? So then they come back 16 weeks later, and you're like, okay, it must look different because they've done 3,000 of these.
Yeah.
And you're amazed that the data shows technique is still the same. Yet they yet they reap all these benefits, right?
I've actually got a picture.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. It's crazy, and of course that leads you to
trying to find that picture for you. I know this is not very good for people listening.
Totally fine. I'm gonna edit this out, but it's you're actually, of course, the conclusion is like, wow, they reap these benefits. I did the swing change,
Yeah, so this is one person pre-training and post-training. That looks better. So there's my 16 kilo swing, and that looks like an improvement.
Okay.
So from the before and it's not massive. He didn't. I can't remember who this was, but this person didn't have a particularly quote unquote bad swing technique to start with. So that one looked like it improved, but this one didn't.
Wow, it even worsened. Really?
Yeah, it looks like this one
Looks like, yeah.
And from memory, this was one of the people that actually did really well. I think this was one of the
Wow.
males in the group that was, I might be
Wow.
wrong, but I think this was a guy that had a training background and pushed
Wow.
himself really hard and did
Wow.
really well.
Wow. Okay, so you even have data that shows there might be a person who actually worsened when it comes to technique, yet they had a great experience, or at least they had.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So this leads to your conclusion that and that's where we can talk about this funny Instagram post with Kanye in it. Well, and I gotta read this.
That was a joke. That was a joke post.
Yeah, but I like it. And you asked some question in it, and you were like, because Neil posted an image on his Instagram where Kanye is holding up this piece of paper that says you can still benefit from swinging a kettlebell even with a lightweight, and technique probably isn't all that important either. And so people were like, I saw this. People were like, you must be joking, right?
Yeah.
And you're actually not.
I think they're forgetting that this is coming from an RKC instructor.
Yeah.
It's not that I don't think technique is important.
Yes,
there's no way.
It's nuanced, yeah.
I would train everybody exactly the same way to do exactly the same thing that I'm doing, because I think there's benefit in having that particular structure. If you want to do hard style tech, I'm not saying that hard style's better than Giveaway sport in any stretch of the imagination.
It's just different. Yeah, it's different.
Yeah. If you were teaching somebody how to do Giveaway sport techniques, you would teach them a particular way, because when it comes to doing the snatch test, as you demonstrated in that other video, technique makes a difference.
Yeah, it does.
There's a reason why it's hard done the RKC way and easier the sport way. If you're swinging a heavier kettlebell, it is easier to swing it the hard style way, because otherwise you're just making life hard for yourself. It's not because it's necessarily going to be at increased risk, because we just don't have any data to show that it is, and it's not a particularly heavy bell. If you compare a 40 kilo swing, which is hard work, versus a 40 kilo deadlift, they're not really comparable and we have no idea really risk wise. But if you're going to be swinging a heavy bell for you, then it's better to be doing it that particular way, because you don't want to be wasting energy in having a flexible trunk, because it's just energy leakage.
Yes. And understanding, I mean, this is just basics, of course. If people think now, okay, now I can just start swinging, cleaning or snatching kettlebells without any instruction and technique, then, well, you're probably using, because we're handsy creatures, you're probably using most of your arms, which makes the exercise irrelevant. So of course you need somebody who teaches you how to understand the connection of your arms and your hips. Most definitely. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying is, listen, maybe we can step back a little bit from this perspective that heavy is always better, and that we always have to instruct it in a particular manner or sense, especially because you had a group of, I mean, we can't argue with this. It's like you have a group of older adults who haven't been active, and look at the results. So it's like, wow, you can actually give somebody an 8 kg kettlebell, have some proper, because funny thing, I have a similar experience. One of our clients, she's 77, and she's doing a hand-to-hand swing with an 8 kg, 3 sets of 15, and it works perfectly. And of course, it's you know, it's not perfect technique, but who cares?
The other way of looking at it is, would you rather have somebody swinging a kettlebell, quote unquote, poorly, or doing nothing at all?
Yeah. And
it's better that they do something.
Yeah, and we could just nuance this a little bit more and say, having somebody who doesn't exercise poorly with heavy weights, then maybe injury risk goes up, right?
Yeah,
but having,
I don't think there's any benefit in practicing something poorly. The
Yeah.
reason why any
Yeah.
skilled task is called skilled is because the skill
You
makes
have
a
to
difference
learn
at
it.
some point.
Yeah.
Whether you're hitting a
Yeah.
golf ball, hitting a tennis ball, or
Hmm.
swinging a kettlebell overhead, there will
Hmm.
always be a point at which technique matters for some reason. And I like the idea, don't practice till you get it right, practice till you can't get it wrong. So it just
Yeah, that's
becomes
what
a
you shared
habit.
with me on Instagram. I love this.
Yeah.
I love this. I love
And
this.
I think that applies to a get up, which is very hard style. You can, if you can get up off the floor with a 40-kilo bell, how you get up off the floor with an 8-kilo bell is irrelevant. It doesn't matter because it's an easy weight. But how you get up off the floor with a 1 RM weight
Hmm.
definitely
That's where
matters.
it counts. That's where it
Yeah.
counts.
So, but you don't want to be having to think about your technique when you're at a 1 RM weight. You you've got to be
Yeah.
thinking
Yeah.
about the thing that's right over your face and
Yeah.
not dropping it on your face.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
it,
most people don't need to. That's what Dan John says, and I know where it comes from. Most people don't need 1 RMs, right?
no,
Most people they simply just do not need it. It's all about consistency and moving, especially with older population. Just be
exactly.
consistent, move, use some proper weights who can challenge you, and that's it. Wow, I love this.
The thing about the bell trial is that there's a group of those people that are still training now, 2 years after I got a message this
Awesome.
morning from one of the ladies.
That's awesome.
There's a video in this slideshow of her ripping an apple in two.
Oh,
But,
awesome.
she's really leading the
Powerful.
charge, and they get
Awesome.
together. They get together every Wednesday morning, weather permitted.
Yes.
But they train, and they're
Yes.
sending each other messages in this private Facebook group, using kettlebells and telling each other and egging each other on 2 years after the trial finished. And this has
That's what
nothing to do with
counts.
me. And that's why we did it.
That's what
It wasn't
counts.
about teaching them how to be an RKC instructor and getting the perfect technique. It was just teaching them how to use this thing that they can buy for next to nothing. They can have it at home. They can have the confidence and skill to be able to put their own little routine together and just exercise regularly. That was it.
Most definitely. Can you turn the screen sharing off?
Yeah, just to
you
show
want-
you this graph.
Yep.
There are two lines on there. There's the solid black line and then the dotted black line. That's
yeah.
the vertical force and that's the horizontal force. So that goes to show the difference. So that's the vertical force and this is the horizontal force. The difference between
Horizontal
the two.
force is the
Forward.
vertical is vertical,
So this
right?
is
The
forward.
upward force.
That's how much. Yeah, this is how much forward force. I
That's
was
200.
producing.
But that's 200. And for people who are listening, the forward force from this graph is 200 Newton, right?
Yeah, at
And
the peak. So that's
at the peak. When
yeah,
the
so
belts are float. Yep.
This first part of where the force is going up dramatically, that's the hip extension. That's the powerful. I'm projecting
Boom.
the swing
Yes.
forward.
Yes.
This is how much forward force I was producing, and this is how much vertical force I was producing.
And the vertical force is 1,006. Yeah. 1600.
This is with my body weight in there, but it goes to show how much effort. Sorry, how much the difference was. I don't know how to turn this screen sharing off now. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. And what really what I like to get from you, Neil, now is what are the big takeaways from this? Does it work with the turn off?
I can't see an option to turn it off.
Oh wait, here. Boom.
Oh, there you go.
I had to turn it up. Okay.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. So the big takeaway from the force profiles, right? One thing. From a coach's perspective, for people who are just learning kettlebells, what are your takeaways? I mean, if I look at your data, it looks like it doesn't align with what at least some part of the coaching philosophy that is hard style, it just doesn't align with it. So what are the key takeaways now?
The forward force component is definitely a big one. Although the bell is moving forward and the intent might be to project the bell forward, that's not where the force is going. The force is going up. The bell's going forward because your arms are creating a massive pendulum. So if you can try and increase the upward force by trying to replicate a jumping pattern, that's going to produce more or result in a greater forward projection of the bell.
So actually, you know, from your perspective, when people are squat swinging it, they're losing, you know, they're losing let's say like the proper idea of the swing, where they're not hinging anymore. So they start bending their knees, not into a deadlift position with heavy weights, but really squatting down.
Yeah. That just makes it hard work.
Yeah, that makes it hard work. But if you say like you have to imagine like you're jumping, that's maybe some people are taken away. It's like, okay, do I have to really squat down now in order to?
No. So the easiest way to demonstrate this is record somebody. So if you've got a way of setting up a vertical jump, whether it's standing side on against a wall and hitting a marker, or you've got a vertical jump stand, record somebody how they do a vertical jump. Their hips will move in the hip hinge pattern. Their hips and knees won't move in a squatting pattern. It's just a very inefficient way to perform a vertical jump, because most of the effort's coming from your hips. So if you can give somebody visual feedback and say, all I want you to do is jump as high as you possibly can, and do a few of those, record it in slow-mo and show them, their knees are not going to be moving forward all that much. They're going to be doing more of a deadlift movement. You say, see that?
Yeah.
Replicate that when you try and do your swing.
Oh, I like
Don't try and snap your knees back.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, my thought process was messed up. Yeah, I thought if you want to propulse yourself as high as you want to, you go down into a squat. But if you actually do this, you lose your posterior chain, right? So you really want to stay in that hip hinge level, where you then boom jump up, right? So the hip
you see it on a video.
Wow, yeah. And so
if you have them do that and then say, you know how you've been slamming your knees back into full extension, like snapping your knees, now try and jump like that. There's actually some jump apps you can get, and you can show them, like, you've jumped this way naturally, and it looks like a deadlift. It looks like a hip hinge pattern, and you've gone 25 centimeters off the floor. Now we've done it again on this jump app, and you've slammed your knees back, and you've only gone up half as high. You're losing half of your vertical jump height by snapping your knees back. It's not an efficient way of generating vertical force. And the reality is that when you swing a bell, most of the force is vertical. The bell's going forwards and backwards. It's going to go forwards and backwards because it's past your arm. But the more vertical force you can generate, the better. So if you can jump or perform your swing like a vertical jump movement pattern, you're going to get a better swing, most likely.
Wow. So how is the world of kettlebells, especially the hardstyle fraction, how are they taking this data, and what's the feedback that you're getting?
I haven't seen any feedback.
Oh,
some hardstyle people do train it like a vertical jump. To be honest, I don't really understand where the knee snapping back into full extension has come from. I think maybe that ties in with this concept of the Kimmy and the bracing. Yeah. I've got to get pencil upright.
And what's your take on this now with the Kimmy, the tension, that's one of the core principles of hardstyle. This tension, especially in the abdominal area, hip area. So from your perspective and from your data, it's like, hey, probably not necessary.
I didn't look at that. I don't think it really makes all that much difference. It makes what data's for. Yeah. It makes you more tired.
It does.
But you don't do that when you swing bells.
I do when I do the 48 kg swing in hardstyle. I do tense my abdominals a bit more.
No, I mean when you're doing your sports swings. Let's say you've got a 28 kilo bell.
Even with hybrids, because I believe there's this difference between hardstyle I think hardstyle is the sprint. Sport is marathon, and I believe the hybrid in between is somewhere like a middle distance runner. I never do it.
Yeah. So
Never.
if somebody that practices Giravoy sport is swinging a 24-kilo bell and they're not doing that bracing, surely it doesn't matter all that much. You
Yeah,
don't
and
need it. So why do I need it?
and they shouldn't do it because it costs energy. So you want to be efficient in the movement. But it's, you know, what we can say is, you know, hardstyle has, it's just a different, the movement pattern is there's a slight difference in the movement pattern, right, in the swing. So because we have this difference in the movement pattern, there's maybe a need. But you know where I'm coming from now is the shear forces. That's actually what the idea is. The idea of Meigh and tension is to engineer out these shear forces.
Let's take a master of kettlebell lifting, Pavel Tsatsouline. He doesn't extend his spine the way most do. He actually flexes his spine into a kettlebell Meigh, a absolute locked core with slight flexion, a very powerful home base. That was a strategy to stiffen the spine and engineer out shear. So when you kettlebell swing, it starts out as a compression to shear ratio, as you would pull in a deadlift. But as you pull the kettle through the top of the arc, you suddenly get more shear load and less compression.
Stu McGill's paper is not saying that the shear force is relevant unless you have a bony pathology. So there's something called a spondylolisthesis. So imagine you've got a two vertebra and one has moved forward. The top one has moved forward relative to the one below it. That's called a spondylolisthesis. So if you've got that, it's almost like, imagine an ice cream cone and you tip the cone forward and the ice cream's going to slip off the front. That doesn't happen. But if doing a deadlift creates an anterior shear force and you already have an anteriorly displaced vertebra, doing a deadlift might aggravate that. But there's a backwards displacement with a kettlebell swing. So I don't understand why a kettlebell swing would cause an irritation to...
No, funny thing, Neil. The funny thing is, Neil, Stu doesn't cite this in his paper. I mean, now that you're saying, I didn't even know this. See, that's why I'm a novice when it comes to reading papers. But
the backward displacement part.
Yeah, but because you mentioned Stuart McGill's swing study, and Stu actually says, right in that study, that the shear forces are not really relevant or just very small, right?
Yeah. He compares it to the is it Canadian it's the National Health and Safety. So I think I've mentioned it in my scoping review as well.
And you said it in the beginning. So it is small, right? Okay. I didn't know this. The reason why I mentioned Stu is because Stu says this in the podcast. He says the reason why Pavel, and I don't want to get into nobody's face, but he said the reason why Pavel uses Meigh and this creating of tension of the abdominal wall and intra-abdominal pressure and all that kind of stuff, the reason why he does it is to engineer out shear forces. Which really the statement in itself compared to what he says.
I have never read that in anything that Pavel's written, that the reason for that abdominal bracing is specifically for shear force.
Okay, so then what's the reason for the bracing?
I can understand that there's this concept of, imagine trying to push a brick with a piece of dry spaghetti or something, a hard object with a piece of dry spaghetti. You can move it if it's stiff because the force is being transferred through an object that doesn't move. Now try doing the same thing with cooked spaghetti. It's not going anywhere because the energy can't be transferred. So if you don't have a stiff torso, the force that's coming through the floor, through your lower limbs, is just going to get wasted through this movable trunk.
Okay.
But the idea behind the hardstyle swing is it's supposed to be lower limb power. It's all about power development and increasing power endurance at the hips, right? But the object that we're moving is held in our hands. that's attached through our arms that goes through our trunk. So all of that movement, any movement in the trunk is just wasted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because
so
we're
that's,
trying to do it as hard and fast as possible. Yeah. So the stiffness, I've never felt that it had anything to do with shear force. I thought it was all about just an efficient transference of force between the kettlebell at the end of an arm and the hip and the floor.
Wow. I really thought it was.
I could be wrong.
Yeah, but I'm just stating what, and I'm gonna send you this, and you can listen to how he shares this with me, and I think he even shares this with Squat University, Stu. So yeah, but other than that, I think that's why we need data, just some heart. I love this because it actually, I have some, let's put it like this, I have some notions about kettlebells, and I have some perspectives on what I think it does, but data, hard data that actually says, yes, that's what it is, that's what's necessary. And I think I love that you did this, because the only thing that I know from kettlebell science is I remember the Mortara et al. Review. Mortara, that just comes to mind because that's one of the papers that I read, and there clearly more science needs to get done on kettlebells, because we get taught so many things, but what does the data even say, right? Which is it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
What was really interesting from the Bell trial was that there's this concept of the kettlebell swing increases lower limb power, and for older adults, lower limb power is really important. They lose that faster than strength. And if trips and falls are a significant risk and problematic for older people, if we can get them swinging a kettlebell and increase their lower limb power, then that's got to be helpful, because they can move their legs quicker. If they stumble, then they can move their legs quicker. So I measured change in relative and absolute lower limb power. So there's an app that you can get called a sit to stand app. So you measure people's limbs, you have them sitting in a chair, record them, and you can you can do it as a personal trainer. So it's like an $8 app. So you can change or measure somebody's improvement in power as a result of a training or coaching program, and vertical jump height. So after all of these swings that they did, I think the average is about 3,000. Neither of those had a significant improvement. So there was no
in lower limb power.
No, none.
Huh?
Should have, but didn't.
Should have, but what? Really?
That's disappointing.
Oh, that's really disappointing.
The number of things that I have been surprised
after three.
by.
Oh, just wait. After three, just to reiterate it, after 3,000 swings in 16 weeks.
Yep.
There was no change in lower limb strength, right? Getting up.
Strength went up. So
strength
I tested their knee extension
Yeah.
and hip extension strength. It went up, but just a little bit. Their 1RM went up, but only a small amount. I think the mean difference was around about 16 kilos. But their lower limb power didn't significantly change.
Which would be necessary when it comes to catching yourself before when you trip, right? You have to be quick in that regard, right?
Yeah.
And you know what the devil's advocate could say, well, that's because they didn't use proper technique.
Exactly. Exactly. So we don't actually have any decent data that shows that the kettlebell swing does improve. I think one of them was vertical jump height, but it's not good quality data. At the moment, we don't have a lot of data that supports a lot of the claims. This is a really good example of
the key points. You mentioned those key points.
Yeah, that was an outcome that I really wanted to see. It should have happened, and it would have been really beneficial. It would have been amazing for this group had it have happened. How it didn't, I don't know. They did a lot. They did a ton of swings over 4 months, a ton of swings, but their power didn't change. Maybe it was the technique.
Their power
don't
didn't
think,
change.
I don't think the technique. I don't know. I don't know.
It's hard to say, yeah, but wow. I mean, we have to acknowledge that people always talk about the kettlebell effect, right? Or the hardstyle folks call it the what the hell effect, right? It's that the skill transfer into so many areas that the kettlebell provides. So there is let's say the at least the anecdotal evidence that we have from so many people who say, yeah, I felt it in that regard, in that area, blah 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 blah. But yeah, wow.
I did have the opposite of that as well, though. So there's something called a floor transfer test. So if an older adult is living at home on their own and they trip and fall over and end up on the floor, it's a safety issue that they have to be able to get up off the ground again.
Yes.
So a floor transfer is basically just going from lying to sitting, sitting to kneeling, kneeling to standing, which is a kettlebell. Sorry, a Turkish get up. You just happen to do it with a kettlebell overhead. So I came into this thinking, I'm going to train these people how to do a Turkish get up without the weight initially. I'm going to teach them this pattern because in my mind, with my physio hat on, I would teach somebody how to get up off the ground this way. It's basically a Turkish get up without the weight. And I'm going to deliberately put that into the trial, and I'm going to have them do that as often as I can. And the intention being to make their floor transfer better. And I expect to see their floor transfer improve measurably because they've been doing lots of Turkish get-ups. Now, when the trial started, it was apparent that this was going to be too hard to do because the group of 16 people, it was just too hard, way too hard for me to do. And I thought, I can't waste this much time and sacrifice the training load volume. I'm just going to have to scratch this. And after I would have maybe done 5 sessions all up throughout the whole trial of Turkish get-ups with them. And that would have been brief. So Turkish get-ups really didn't feature in this training program, but their floor transfer test did significantly increase by quite a large amount.
Wow.
I think it was to a 12-second. I had them do it 5 times, timed, and they knocked off, I think the mean difference was 12 seconds, which was massive.
Wow, and 12 seconds in difference. Wow.
Visually, watching them do it, the difference was dramatic. It was amazing. And that, for me, was probably the most exciting change in the whole trial, was the change in the floor transfer time.
Wow. Wow. That's from doing swings alone, right?
Well, no. I don't know. I can't answer that question, why they got better.
Okay.
I thought that if I practice a Turkish get-up, the floor transfer test has got to get better because they're basically the same thing. But then I took the get-ups out. They hardly did any get-ups, but still their floor transfer got better. The only time they were on the floor was really doing a Turkish get-up. So how did their floor transfer get better? I don't know.
What kind of exercise did they do? I mean, the swing?
Oh, lots.
Many exercises. You incorporated many exercises.
So if people want to see the program, it's available. So if you go to the BMC publications,
put it in the description.
It's one of the supplementary files. Literally everything we did on every day for 12 weeks is in there with videos as well.
Awesome.
Not a lot of get-ups, but their floor transfer improved.
Fascinating. It's sometimes, it's.
I beg your pardon, sorry. The mean difference was 6 seconds, but it was a large change.
It's funny, right? So you set out to do something, you want to prove something, and then the results were like, oh, didn't expect this. Wow. Yeah, but that's how this works. Neil, wow, this is fascinating. I think just more research, especially from people who are, I don't know, and that's maybe one of the questions, or one of my last questions. From the science that is available when it comes to kettlebells, it is rare, right?
Yes, there's not much, and the majority of it tends to be younger, athletic, college age people with athletic outcomes like sprint and vertical jump.
Yeah, and why do you think it's just not because the kettlebell is just not popular, or just not as, I mean, it became more popular, but do you think the landscape's going to change in the future?
I hope so. I haven't. This is the first conversation I've had about my trial. Sorry, I'm talking so much about it.
Yeah, I love it. We're learning a lot.
It's literally the first time I've had an opportunity to talk about it.
Fascinating.
I hoped there would be more interest in these outcomes than there has been. But I just don't think people are that enthusiastic about kettlebells, to be honest.
I mean, it gained incredible popularity last year, in 2020. And we still see, I saw just some trends in 2022, 23, or 22 at least. There's some projections that kettlebells, or at least at home workouts, training at home, that's something that's top on the list, you know, taking off of the flow from the pandemic, that people are now realizing, well, I can train at home and maybe get the same results or even better results. Which is a good thing. I mean, at least people are working out. But what really fascinates me is that you have a lot of people wanted to join the trial. You still have older adults who are still getting together in a group, training together, just in being more healthy, getting stronger, and reaping all these beautiful benefits of training, which is must be a very beautiful output of your research. And at the end of the day, it's just, it shows me, you know what that shows me is that we just have to be open-minded. You're probably aware of, when you are into kettlebells, that there is this tribal think going on. I mean, probably in every area of where humans interact with each other, there's always a sense of tribalism. And what we, I think, have to learn, and I wonder what your take on this is, just to be incredibly open-minded, listen to everybody who knows something, or like you, who's done some research, has data to maybe even prove that some claims are not as valid, or maybe even goes into another direction. So we have to stay open-minded, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so dependent on the individual. It's very easy to get sucked into a silo where you're given a particular message, and there's a charismatic individual at the front of it, and you believe them because you have no reason not to, and that's the path that you go down. It's not necessarily wrong. It's just, as you say, it's human behavior. There's no data suggesting that any one style or technique is better than another. It's just, I would rather have somebody doing something than nothing, and do the one that you enjoy. I when I'm training upstairs, I'll use a Guravoy sport style snatch. I don't do the hard style snatch because it's I find it harder to do. It's more tiring, and I'm not particularly interested in doing that the way that I used to. It's got to be something that you do, and there's got to be longevity in it. You've got to want to do it. It's so hard from a behavior change point of view. My whole study was about just encouraging people to exercise. And I think if people that are watching or listening to this and wanting to encourage more people to use kettlebells, I'd say have a look at the qualitative study, which was the feedback where I interviewed everybody. Because as I said before we started recording, I hoped there was going to be a positive outcome for this in terms of what we were measuring. And that happened. But if they hated it and said, you know what, you pushed me way too hard, I hate kettlebells, I haven't enjoyed this at all, and I'm not going to pick one up ever again, then it would be useless. It wouldn't work in the real world. But that didn't happen. The attendance rate, I was pushing them hard. They were training 5 days a week, having gone from nothing, and the attendance rate was over 90%.
That's crazy.
And they're still going.
I shared
overwhelmingly positive.
I shared this with you via Instagram. I was like, wow, you have such an high, and even the people that dropped out of the study were not as much. So you had a high rate of people completing. Is that right? Completing the study.
Yeah, there were 24 of the 29 got to the end of the 12 weeks, and the 5 that dropped out, the only person that dropped out because of the study was the lady with the 50-year history of back pain. There wasn't much I could do about that. All the others were health-related issues. One was a hypertension that couldn't be controlled. Another one got Ross River virus. I can't remember what the others were off the top of my head, but those people would have continued had they been able to. It wasn't that they said, you know what, I hate this, or I've hurt myself and dropped out. Even the people that did have aches and pains, there was one lady in her 70s that was, I would describe as the frailest of the group. It irritated her shoulder, and we weren't able to get rid of that. She still continued to the end.
Wow, she pushed through.
There were 2 ladies that had like an intercostal strain, and we just changed the way that they were training, and they got to the end.
Awesome.
It was fantastic.
Awesome.
It overwhelmingly positive. So if people are wanting to promote kettlebells, that qualitative study is, I think, more valuable than the main trial paper, because people aren't really interested in increasing their 1RM or increasing their grip strength. The average person doesn't give 2 hoots about that. That's useful for us because we know that it improves your physical function. That's useful to the people that measure that stuff. But for the older adults that aren't doing anything, that just want to do something and feel more confident, and if you read that, they describe how much easier things were at home, just tasks at home, and
everyday life,
quotes. It was overwhelmingly positive. I'd say read that, use that to promote kettlebell training as a way of getting people in and giving it a go. It doesn't, I guess, coming back to answering your questions, it doesn't need to be about high weights. It doesn't need to be about high RPE. It doesn't need to be about saying, hey, you can't go to a heavier kettlebell swing until you've absolutely nailed the technique with this 8. And I've heard that before, where coaches,
I've heard that too.
You can't go heavier until you've perfected this technique. You can probably, with this age group, you can probably dispense with all of that and say, hey, let's just have some fun. We'll teach you how to use this so it feels comfortable. You enjoy it. And we'll do lots of reps. You don't need to break a sweat too much. We'll push you a little bit hard, but you go as hard as you like, and you'll be fine. You'll probably benefit out of it. And it's more about getting together, and they'll probably build momentum, and they'll want to train more often, and then they'll want to explore new techniques, and they'll want to do better. That's the way that I would approach it.
The open mind. It's really, really awesome to talk to you, Neil. You're really inspiring me with many things. It's like, wow, we have to do more kettlebell stuff for the older population. We have to, increase the selection of products that older people can choose to, because we see it from experience as well with people in our gym who are older and they love it, and they even do swings at home because it's like, wow. And like you said, I hear stuff like, I'm now able to go down on my knees, do something on the floor, and get back up again. It's just that the basic quality of life that goes up with something that is also fun, right? And just for me to understand, you're saying qualitative studies. So if you have a trial like you have, then the qualitative study is something different. Is that another part?
Yeah, so quantitative and qualitative are the 2 different components. So quantitative is measuring the numbers. So that's looking at jump height and power and force. Qualitative is asking them, having a conversation and getting feedback and saying, did you like it? What did you like? What didn't you like? And why? How did it make you feel? It's all of the stuff that's meaningful to them.
And that's meaningful to us as well. It's funny because I'm reading like I said, I'm a layman when it comes to reading papers, but I've never heard that it's the first time that I'm hearing this, that they actually now then ask the people, hey, how was it? And that information is then disclosed, right, in the trial, right?
You've heard of Simon Sinek? Must have.
Simon Sinek. Yeah.
You know his that video about the why.
Yeah. With the circle.
You know your why. That qualitative stuff, that's the why.
Which is which is the golden nugget, right?
Yeah.
It's the most important thing.
Exactly. If you want to market kettlebells,
Yeah.
and you want to understand how to motivate somebody and market to somebody's why, have a read of that paper,
circle.
and you'll get some feedback from the people that went through it and lived it. And I was deliberately pushing them hard. In reality, you wouldn't be doing it as hard as I did. So there would be fewer minor injuries, quote unquote. There weren't. I didn't consider that there were any injuries. Nobody hurt themselves in a way that I would classify as an injury. It would be far easier for them, and arguably they might even enjoy it more because they weren't going as hard as they did. They did enjoy being pushed hard, but that qualitative stuff is gold. In terms of, if you're a kettlebell coach and wanting to get group classes and a different population and older people, that paper is gold.
Awesome. And we can find it, right? For people who are interested, we can find it in the the bell trial. Everything's in there, right? With the Springer link, from the Springer link, right?
Yeah. So all of these are available as preprints or the published versions on Google Scholar. So if you type in my surname, Meigh, and kettlebell, they'll all come up.
Okay.
There is a preprint of the qualitative paper. It has already been accepted by BMC Geriatrics, and it should be available from June onwards. I'm just waiting to hear back from them.
Awesome.
You'll get the same message if you read the preprint, but the BMC paper when it comes out next month.
Awesome. Would you be willing to share the link for the qualitative studies with us so that people can? Because I think that's something that's really interesting. Like you mentioned, it's so interesting for people, for coaches, for trainers, and for folks who are really into, hey, how did they feel? What was the feedback? Because I mean, numbers are great, but hey, how did the people fare? And I like it. I mean, we had great numbers, but after 16 weeks, everybody said, I'll never do this again. Wow. It's not very applicable to life then.
Yeah, there were definitely some things that I would do differently. You know how you were saying that you have, and I mentioned those semi-group, semi-private classes. I think it would be better to teach people, as you and I have both been doing, teach people how to do the exercises and get comfortable and proficient before you chuck them into a class. That would be one. Smaller group classes. I had 15, 16 people sometimes, and it was too big. I would maybe cap that at somewhere closer to 10. And I had quite a variation in physical capacity. So there might be a benefit in getting a group where there's a similar physical capacity. So they would be the only things that I would take from having run those groups.
What's interesting from my perspective is actually it works very well if we mix the levels also. Because I know the people, because I know the clients who come into the gym, and I know exactly what they're like. Then sometimes I'm like, okay, you guys are doing the half snatches, and she's doing the full snatch. Okay, so then you can, but then you have to know the clients, you have to know the exercises, you have to know the proper adjustments. But I think there's value in both of it and understanding how to apply it.
Yeah, I did get a sense that I was maybe pushing people a bit too hard, too fast. But that was more a reflection of the time constraints and the study, rather than I wouldn't have done that in reality. And I never had any issues with the group training at my practice. But Rosette was in there as a 68-year-old, 5-foot female, swinging 40 kilos.
Awesome.
She was training with a guy in his 20s that was over 6 foot that used to do CrossFit. So I never had any issues in the practice. But one of the guys in the trial, I didn't know when he signed up, but within the first week, I watched him struggling to get off the ground, and I know that he'd said to somebody else, "I don't feel like I belong in this group." But he had a background as somebody that used to do powerlifting as a young guy, but felt like he was lagging behind the group. In that sense.
From that perspective, get it? 100%. So Neil, wow, hey. it took us almost 1 hour and 40 minutes. I'm
Sorry,
really,
it's taken so
no, you don't have to
I can
apologize.
talk on the wet cement when I get going.
No, it's awesome. I'm listening. It's a great learning experience, and it's great, for people who are open-minded, who really, we know the claims, we know what the kettlebell does, we know technique, we know all the people, it's a small world, but it's great to have the actual data, and then we have to be, I get this from this so much, we have to be open-minded, and then not be like, but this is, not just listen and see what the data says, and then, we always know we need more data, that's always good, but there's at least some trajectory that is recognizable, where we can say, okay, it seems like some things go into different directions when we actually test it and have some good data on it.
Yeah.
So,
and I'd like to reiterate that I'm not suggesting that technique doesn't matter. I train, I do the technique the way that the textbook says, give or take, and that's how I would train people to do it. I think it's important, but it probably, or it might not be as important as many people think it is.
That's great.
In some cases.
But as a title, it works perfect. It works like, technique doesn't matter. And then people are like, and then you can actually explain it. That's how social media and YouTube works.
Attention grabbing.
Yeah, attention grabbing. We have to do it to some extent. But wow, it's fascinating. Neil, thank you so much. If you're looking for kettlebell courses that can help you lose weight, build muscle, and improve your kettlebell technique, then check out the Leberstock Academy. Let us help you discover a new perspective on kettlebell training, making it simple and easy for you to understand. Join the waiting list of your desired course now and secure your spot when it's open for enrollment. Link is in the description.